You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 19th of May 2025 on Monocle Radio. Israel ends its blockade of Gaza to an extremely limited and grudging extent. Is the UK tiptoeing back towards Europe? And does the popular vote at Eurovision tell us anything about anything? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Daniela Peled and Kerry Brown will discuss the day's big stories, and we'll drop by the Palestine Pavilion at the Cannes Film Festival. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Daniela Peled, Managing Editor at the Institute for War and Peace Reporting, and Kerry Brown, Director of the Lao China Institute at King's College London and author of The Great Reversal. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Daniela, regular listeners will be aware of your fondness for local history and local history museums, and as great good luck would have it, you have recently been visiting a city which has, if anything, a surplus of local history.
Could there ever be such a thing? Indeed, I am freshly returned from Belfast, where I perused the Ulster Museum, the Ulster History Museum, the Ulster Town Hall Museum. There was a lot of museuming. Extremely pleasant experience.
Did any of their local history museums leap out at you especially?
Well, it's a bit of a cliche, but I have to warmly recommend the Black Cab tours of. It's variously pitched as the murals and the Troubles and the Peace Wall, but it's very, very good. I mean, it's quite hokey. It's like some local guy who grew up in the tough parts of town tells you about his personal story, but it's pretty wonderful. And I'm quite heartened as well. There is so much interest in it as well. It's like a proper tourism attraction, which is good. People want to know about post-conflict societies. Titanic Museum, blockbuster. Also really quite fun. A lot of local history in between
indeed.
The boaty bits.
I've never visited the Titanic Museum in Belfast, largely because the fact that they've turned it into a tourist attraction somewhat baffles me. I think if I'd built that ship, I'd keep quiet about it. Kerry, you have recently been, again, a city with not a lack of local history, albeit of a perhaps more distant and more benign sort, but Florence.
Yeah, no, indeed. I went to talk about Japan and China there. And the think tank, a European think tank, was just outside the city and reportedly was on the site of where Boccaccio wrote in the 14th century during the Black Death, the great Decameron kind of series of stories. And it was a very idyllic and wonderful garden, very peaceful, very quiet, not open to the public. I just wandered around. Yeah, if it indeed was written there, it was based there, it didn't surprise me.
I mean, I think not open to the public is the only way you're going to get any of that kind of peace in Florence. Did you at any point elbow your way into the centre at all?
Well, no. The place that I did go to after that was to pay homage to the real reason why I went, and my heart was to stand before the tomb of Machiavelli and on my head, and I felt his spirit, and that has informed me since I've come back. I work at a university. There can never be enough Machiavelli.
Well, I suspect, unfortunately, his influence is going to colour a great deal of the rest of this show. We will start in Gaza, into which Israel may shortly permit a small quantity of extremely basic food supplies, providing an amount of relief from an 11-week blockade which has edged the Strip's 2 million people to the brink of starvation. This does not appear, however, to be any kind of beginning of the end of Gaza's torment. Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, has boldly stated that such aid as will be admitted is the bare minimum necessary to deflect accusations of war crimes. A ship that has sailed as of the ICC's indictment last November of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and residents in Khan Yunis have been issued with an evacuation warning ahead of another imminent Israeli offensive. Daniela, in similar circumstances, somebody is often said to have said the quiet part loud, but it's not even a quiet part anymore, is it? Israel does seem just completely intent on rendering the entirety of Gaza unlivable.
Well, let's not forget the ICC charges against Netanyahu was also alleging using starvation as a weapon of war. I think it's clear that international pressure has led to them allowing a certain amount of aid. I mean, I think maybe fewer than 10 trucks have gone in so far today, and you need hundreds each day. So this is going to sort of ameliorate some of the international criticism, also coming from President Trump, by the way, who's made it clear that he would like to see some humanitarian assistance there. But it also seems to be a precursor to something perhaps more worrying, which is Israel's plan to allow humanitarian assistance through its own an independent agency that's headquartered in Switzerland, and it's run by a former Marine. And the US also supports this idea. But this would see the military securing aid distribution points, 4 or 5 around Gaza. The problem is all the international agencies have said they do not want to work in partnership with this agency, because not only could it contribute to population displacement, because obviously if people need aid, they're going to have to move to where these hubs are. The hubs are not going to be set up where people are. But also it will destroy their international credibility. But it's a good sleight of hand, isn't it? You can say domestically and internationally we're letting in aid, while actually using that aid ultimately in the longer term for your own military strategy.
And that all notwithstanding, even, Kerry, do we have any reason to have any faith at all that even this amount of aid will be allowed through, or will Israel do that thing of finding a reason to suspend these deliveries?
Well, the record's not good. I was talking to someone earlier today about Trump's position on all of this, and he's just been in the Middle East, obviously, and has done surprising things. And they said, they made a point of that he hasn't supported Israel. I mean, he's been more difficult and more hard to read. Not that he's ever easy to read. And I wonder kind of whether eventually, I mean, someone said recently that the American public opinion is also not really supportive of what Israel does. I don't know how long it's sustainable to have this kind of policy with your biggest sort of military and diplomatic backer kind of getting flaky on you, particularly as America has many, many other battles that it's involved with at the moment. I kind of think that will probably have some impact at the end of the day. But no, I mean, also for the places that I deal with, particularly in Asia, I think they look at this and they just find the West has been very hypocritical, and I think the diplomatic impact of that is quite profound.
I mean, which does bring us to, well, not quite the eternal question, but a nearly 2-year-old question, Daniela, which is where does this all end? I mean, around 2/3 of the buildings of Gaza are estimated to be damaged or destroyed. Israel is going to run out of anything even resembling a target eventually. Netanyahu is quoted today as saying that Israel will take over the entire strip, though he hasn't really said what he means by that. Do we yet have any sense of where he thinks and how he thinks this ends?
Well, sad to say, he's hoping it won't end for as long as possible. I mean, it's become a cliche that he's beleaguered by corruption investigations. He needs to stay in power to keep his immunity. The aims of the supposed aims of the war are to destroy Hamas's capability, make sure it can't function as a government. But the majority of the Israeli public really don't support that. They want the end to the war if the hostages are brought back. Simple as that. They also, Netanyahu is pretty unpopular with them as well. So we are in this sort of endless cycle. As Kerry said, like Netanyahu is not really doing so very well with Trump. He thought probably that he was going to be on a shoe-in and be able to do really whatever he wanted. And that's not been the case at all. Israel was completely sidelined from this trip to the Gulf. Israel thought that it was going to play an important part in talks with Saudi Arabia over military deals. And that hasn't happened. Trump would like this war to stop. I mean, perhaps not under circumstances that are favourable for Palestinian civilians or a long-term peace, but he wants it over. The Israeli public want it over. The international community want it over. God knows the Palestinians want it over. But Netanyahu is still driving forward this policy that for him, it's more important to keep his ultra-right-wing coalition than to find some way of de-escalating.
Just finally on this, Kerry, is that aspect of this seeming like an interminable and unbreakable cycle actually beneficial to Netanyahu? If this just starts to become one of those things that people become inured to, it's just a thing that happens. There's not really anything anybody can do to stop it, so you look elsewhere.
Well, we said we were going to talk about Machiavelli, right? And so keeping a kind of conflict going perpetually is, I guess domestically it makes sense, but it's what a small objective for what a massive amount of suffering and loss of moral standing. I mean, I think it's hard to defend. Again, a Chinese student I have sent me Al Jazeera sort of drone flights over Gaza and the filming of what's left, and kind of said, how is this justifiable? And it's hard to justify if you're just doing it on the basis of domestic politics. I mean, that's, kind of very, very hard calculus.
Well, the UK, meanwhile, may have inched somewhat back towards Europe. The UK and the EU have agreed a new deal on post-Brexit relations, which may shorten queues at airports, make trading food across borders less of a pest, allow the UK access to EU funds for defence development, and open up the possibility of some sort of scheme which permits young folk to work and travel relatively freely in both jurisdictions. There is also agreement to continue the current arrangements for EU boats to fish in UK waters until 2038, which has prompted anguished cries of sellout from the usual suspects. Fun fact, more people work in the UK's yoga industry than in fishing. Kerry, first of all, is this basically good? Dare we say that this is probably on balance a good thing?
Where it's best for sort of members of the liberal metropolitan elite like me to not say it's good. I mean, I think it's an awful deal. I think it should be rolled back. Like, when I'm standing in those vast queues with my British passport going into Europe, I am very happy that there's a possibility now that we'll be able to use e-gates. So that's dependent on the Schengen area kind of, or the common EU area, sorting out their kind of immigration admissions scheme that doesn't seem it's going to be happening anytime soon. I mean, this is really about messaging, because I don't think Starmer can say it's too big a victory, because then you're going to fall into the hands of reform, and obviously that's guiding so much policy now.
Oh, they are already throwing their toys from their pram with considerable exuberance.
But these are always issues of perception. I remember I worked years ago as an official, and it's perception. About Europe, it's always perception. Most people have no clue about fisheries. I mean, as you say, it's a very small area. But I can't see how, with the economic challenges we're going through at the moment, that we can avoid doing something, even if it's not, kind of taking part in the common, the common market and the all of that stuff. I get it. That's very politically toxic, but we have to do something. So this is good. Just agreeing to meet is good, and the fact that they have something coming out of it is good. But I mean, it's not enough. But at least they're still talking. That's really important.
Daniela, you live near the water, a canal. Why is fishing such a live rail in British politics? This is not to belittle the industry or the people who work in it. It is important in its own way, but there has been this thing for the last decade that the pro-Brexit tendency talks about British fishing like we're Iceland, and that the country's entire economy lives or dies on fishing, and it is an almost immeasurably small part of the UK economy.
Again, I mean, this, as Kerry said, this is about communications, and this is about feeliness. We are an island nation. We feel we are surrounded by waters, and they're our waters, and they're our fish. And so we have perpetual battles with the
British
French.
Fish.
British fish. We have perpetual battles with the French and the Icelandics, and it really is all about perception. And it's also our brand. Scottish salmon. This means a lot to us. somewhat delighted to note that the GB News reporter did ask Keir Starmer at the press conference if he was indeed stitching the fishing industry up like a kipper, which was a a pleasant moment from GB News.
They worked on that for some time.
But I think all the scripts were written before any of these agreements were signed. The Daily Mail, GB News. The Conservative Party all knew exactly what their attack lines were going to be, and it didn't really matter what agreement was done. In fact, really, the government missed a trick. They could have gone a bit further because they were going to get this amount of grief, whatever. And it speaks to this ongoing issue with Starmer's government. It just does seem to be a comms failure. There does seem to be a lack of narrative coming across. And of course, it's not easy to necessarily sell pro-Brexit, anti-Brexit. And, I'm of an age to remember the eras of spin under Blair, and perhaps we don't want to go that far. But you need to have a story. You need to be able to tell a positive story and defend what you're doing. And, that they've left so many areas of attack open for this, and you could see, Badenoch just drilling down, and she's not the most impressive politician in the universe, but it's a really, really, really easy target.
All that being the case, though, Kerry, and given that the people who are up in arms about this are the people who are just going to be up in arms about anything short of bricking up the Channel Tunnel, there is literally no point in attempting to win them over, or I suspect they're more hardline voters. At this point, and I realise that this is a flight of fancy, but let's go with it. What is stopping Sir Keir Starmer from saying, look, we've had a near decade-long bash at this Brexit thing. It sucks. It isn't working. We all know it's not working. I'm looking at polls day after day saying wrong to leave versus right to leave is now around 55-30. I'm done with this. We're going back.
Well, I guess it depends on the economy. At the moment, the economy is stagnant and productivity is awful. But that's not enough. I remember someone told me they had discussed with David Cameron some years ago what would make Britain reverse its decision. And he said the only thing would be economic, kind of a recession or something like that. And I suppose if you're a politician calculating, it's still the opinion polls. I don't know. You can really say, yeah, they'll say that today. But once you go into a campaign, the emotions kick off. We've all been dealing with the EU and China, the EU and Britain for a long time. There's a Taiwanese saying, a bad soap never ends.
Daniela, just finally on this, and on this question, and it pertains to the previous question about Starmer's obvious and I guess perhaps politically understandable nervousness around this issue. But this idea of a scheme around free movement for youth, which he still won't actually commit to, despite the fact that the EU seems to be saying, here it is. Do you want it? You can have it. Is it just that he's worried that if even he acknowledges that much, even beyond the usual suspects doing usual suspect stuff, people might look at these kids travelling around the continent, living and working freely across Europe and thinking, God, that looks nice.
I think it's just a bit sort of more boring, really, the reason. We could really do with young people from Europe and elsewhere coming to study in our universities, because that's plummeted, and that's really an important part of it's an important industry for us. But there's no way to have people who to come and live and work here or study here for even a year without it affecting the migration figures. That's the problem. There's I think they're trying to look at solutions that maybe they can come for a year or 2 years, or try and fudge it in some way, but. People come in, the migration figures go up, and that's just too much of a political football at the moment, and it's just too easy to weaponise against Labour.
Well, to India and Pakistan, where both sides seem mercifully to have agreed to call it a draw following recent unpleasantness. As the dust has settled and smoke dispersed, at least for the moment, an Indian think tank associated with the Ministry of Defence has suggested that Pakistan had a significant helping hand during the brief hostilities, specifically that China had lent Pakistan assistance in organising its air defence and radar capabilities, and had also helped Pakistan adjust its satellite satellite coverage of the battle space. Among the features of the brief conflict was the first combat deployment of the Chinese-made Chengdu J-10 fighter jet. Pakistan claims to have shot down 6 Indian planes, while India has thus far taken the neither confirm deny line on that. Kerry, first of all, as a general principle, why would China want a piece of this squabble?
Well, it's got pretty good relations with Pakistan and has had for a long, long time. India is more complicated. They have the unresolved borders, and they have a fairly sort of tense relationship. So Pakistan is much more sort of stable for China. I don't think they want to get too much into this because they're both really, really important to China. But I think also China has created this new stealth fighter. There's a family of them, I think, J-10, J-35.
Indeed.
And I guess a bit like with Russia, Ukraine, I think China is looking to test out using this by proxy. I mean, it's not involved in any wars at the moment. It might want to get involved.
Hasn't been for quite a long time, in fact, really.
1979 with Vietnam, and it was rubbish at that. So, I mean, it hasn't really won. It's a bit like England and football. It hasn't won for a long, long time, right? So I think it's interested in opportunistically having small involvement, and that's what this sounds like, but not really kind of getting too sort of drawn into it. And also, I think it's kind of interested in maybe worrying India. I mean, India is a massive, massive competitor at the end of the day, although it's got a much smaller economy. I think the 21st century eventually is going to be about a competition between China and India. I mean, they're the big ones, so they'll be eventually the big ones. And I think China is interested in slightly sort of preying on it, but not getting into any direct, apart from the border, not getting into direct conflict.
As a sort of not necessarily specifically about this conflict, but conflict in general, Daniela, what is it? Because it would be nice if it could be encouraged that brings both sides quite early on at a point at which obviously matters could escalate dreadfully, especially when you do have 2 nuclear armed powers involved. What actually brings them to a point of kind of agreeing, actually, let's not do this?
Sometimes it's exhaustion. But in a situation like this, it's less likely to happen, and often international pressure and domestic pressure. But when you have a long-running conflict and people are more or less managing the status quo without huge loss of life, without huge disruption, and once you get the constant warnings of like imminent nuclear apocalypse and they never come to pass, it just sort of plods along. And as Kerry says, there are outside actors with interests in maintaining this division. And as I saw in Belfast a couple of weeks ago, when conflicts end, it's not straightforward, and it's quite messy as well. It takes outside actors, and people have to have a vested interest in this. And this is, you could make a plan on paper of how to resolve this issue, but to stretch a metaphor, all the ducks need to be in the row, and they're not at the moment at all. Not even close.
Just a final thought on this one, Kerry. China, it's often forgotten, does have this is probably not quite the right metaphor, but it does have a dog in the Kashmir fight. It has bitten a couple of chunks of that territory off for itself. Is there any amount of Chinese pressure that we may come to learn about, that they are quite happy with the status quo as it is because they want to keep the bits of Kashmir they have?
Yeah, I mean, so they have obviously a border dispute with India, and there's been sort of low-level conflict there. And I think it is very hard to see that being resolvable because of its relationship with Tibet. I mean, and that kind of the contested nature of that territory for them. And also, I mean, the odd thing about that dispute and China's relations with India is I think it's likely that China will compromise at some point. I mean, it has compromised with Russia and others about border disputes, but India, I don't think ever will. So India's far harder to do agreements with than China, far harder.
Well, to the Eurovision Song Contest, organisers of which may not yet have finished emitting the sigh of relief they launched late on Saturday evening, as Austria leapt up the table at the last minute to thwart a late-charging Israel and spared all concerned the considerable logistical and political headache of having to start planning a 2026 warble-off in Tel Aviv. Israel were represented by Yuval Raphael, a survivor of the massacre at the Nova Sukkot Festival on October 7th, 2023. Israel were languishing mid-table after the jury votes were counted, but cleaned up in the popular vote. A similar phenomenon occurred last year when juries ranked Israel 12th, but the popular vote got Israel within a whisker of victory. Daniela, Israel will doubtless spin this year as they did last year, that this shows that there is a usually ignored groundswell of support for the state of Israel over and above whatever regard people may have for their Eurovision contender. Do we buy that entirely?
I mean, the whole Eurovision voting system is incredibly arcane and esoteric and complicated and doesn't really make any sense. I mean, Ireland is supposed to be fairly hostile towards Israel, and they gave it loads and loads of points. So what's all that about? I have a sneaking suspicion that there's a lot of expat Israelis who have left Israel because they don't want to live there anymore, who repeatedly called up and voted, because the Eurovision is a way to support the concept and the idea and the nationhood of your country as divorced from its government and its current actions. I think this is sort of quite plausible. People who are going to vote for have a little bit more power than people who are going to vote against. You know, people who really wanted Israel not to do so well. Who were they going to vote for Azerbaijan? It doesn't really make
well, no, because they didn't make the final.
Well, shows how closely I was watching it. But Azerbaijan did actually, I think, give Israel 12 points.
They might well have done.
In a previous round, which goes to say that, arms sales can go a lot of way when it comes to Eurovision votes.
Kerry, Daniela mentions the voting system. It does strike me that there's a fairly obvious problem with the voting system, which is that you can vote 20 times. And the thing is, like, most people, of course, will have watched the contest, seen that one thing they liked, and just tapped in the numbers to be charged 15p to vote once. But if you're really militant about it and you have coordinated with quite a few hundred other people who feel really passionately about it and you all vote 20 times, I mean, I can't understand how Eurovision did not spot the problem here.
But when has the Eurovision voting system, not been a problem? Do you remember Turkey and Greece? Was it about Cyprus? And every year, there would be...
Oh, that's still the case. Cyprus and Greece still swap votes.
That is long enough standing. I remember Terry Wogan, when he compared the Eurovision, remember, would always have a big laugh about this.
No, there's block voting of that sort all over the map now. The Baltics all back each other up, so do the Nordics. Weirdly, the ex-Yugoslavs who fought a war with each other within living memory all vote for each other as well.
So it's clearly not about music. It never was about music. I mean, so
that's true.
I guess it's also a bit like football for sort of like a British person or English person. We never do well, right? We never do well. So, and yet we kind of produce really world-class music. So I don't know. I suppose it's good that there's people really passionate about Eurovision, and it's good that they participate. I mean, it's better that we take out our differences there than elsewhere. But can you honestly remember any Eurovision song from recent years? I mean, I can't remember any at all.
No, I actually watched it on Saturday night, and I can remember thinking most of it was dreadful, Daniela, but I can't remember. I don't
Andrew,
think
that's what you think about most modern music.
That is true, but I'm not even sure I can remember a single one of the songs as such. But the more serious question attached to Israel's participation, Daniela, was indeed about Israel's participation. There were people saying this year, as they did last year, you threw Russia out in 2022 on clearly moral grounds because Russia was pursuing a course of action that a great many people found objectionable. What is different about this?
Well, I've just mentioned Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan also waged a
Indeed
war
so.
of conquest, and 100,000 people were displaced as a result not so long ago. I mean, I think the Eurovision persists because we have this collective fiction that it's not about politics, and we're putting politics aside. And I wonder if sometimes if it stays a number, because it gets increasingly harder and harder to do that. It's it's not so much fun if it's this political. It should be cheesy, and once the politics overcome the cheesiness, like who's going to have a watch party anymore apart from you?
Oh, I mean, no, the more political it gets, the more likely I am to tune in. I absolutely adore all the petty, block voting and
petty stuff is great, but when it comes to actual accusations of war crimes, it's just a little bit less jolly.
True enough. And speaking as an Australian, enraged though I was that my people were once again thwarted by jealous Europeans and not even permitted into the final. It does make me laugh every year, Kerry, when just they put up the numbers for the popular vote and wow, really nobody likes you people anymore.
Oh, it's you people.
By which I mean the United Kingdom. Are you appalled, shocked, insulted, wounded by that, or could you simply not care less?
I don't really care that much, but I mean, it is curious about the popular, the popular voting and the thing with Israel. It is curious, and I suppose it says something. I don't know what it really means, and it's really curious that a Eurovision Song Contest having Australia. I mean that's really curious, but
Well, if that's your attitude, I'm just going to wind the show up right there. Kerry Brown and Daniela Peled, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, the 78th Cannes Film Festival is well underway, and this year features a range of films by Palestinian directors. As well as the screenings, the Palestine Film Institute has also curated the Palestine Pavilion, a programme of talks and meetups aimed at championing the country's cinema and generating vital industry support. Well, earlier, Monocle's Hassan Anderson spoke to Salma Abu Ayash from the Board of Executives at the PFI. Hassan began by asking Salma about the work that went into bringing Palestine's pavilion to life.
This is actually the second time we've had a pavilion. We were primarily funded by Watermelon Pictures, by the Mashharawi Fund, which is the fund of Rashid Mashharawi, a veteran Palestinian director, Hekmat Palestine, also an organization affiliated with him, and with 2048 Foundation, which is a foundation established by an up-and-coming artist, Saint Levi. But in terms of us coming to life, I have to tell you, it's not just the 4 people on the executive or the 4 people on the legal board. It's been a huge amount of work by so many, especially film workers for Palestine and members of Film Workers for Palestine, which is an international body of film workers that have been incredibly supportive in connecting us with the right organizations, with the right funders, with the right speakers. It's really a labor of love of many people that are spread out across the globe.
Being at Cannes to celebrate that work and champion Palestinian identity strikes me as a very difficult balancing act to pull off when Israel continues to decimate Gaza and West Bank settler violence continues to expand with impunity. So what's the balancing act been like for you at a festival like Cannes when you're there to champion Palestinian identity and that identity faces a very present existential threat?
Hassan, thank you so much for this question. For us Palestinians, we're living this parallel life where we're engaging with our daily work, we're engaging with what we normally do, we're hosting events and doing our activism to bring Palestinian question, to the forefront, and you can't help but celebrate it. But at the same time, we're in mourning. We're in mourning for what's happening, and we're enraged. But that didn't stop us from celebrating life. To me personally, I catch myself sometimes feeling too happy, and I want to almost like modulate and resituate myself in the trauma we're living today. It's what people who are colonized and who live in oppressive societies experience, where we constantly are having to hold our pain and our trauma and to keep resisting and persisting for our kin that are in Gaza and the West Bank and all over Palestine that are under huge duress and experiencing a genocide.
Genocide has been explicitly called out in an open letter that was published at the start of Cannes, also signed by hundreds of big actors, directors and producers, expressing solidarity with Gaza, calling for the release of the remaining hostages, and also condemning the killing of Fatma Hassouna, who was killed along with 10 of her family members in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza last month, the day after a film about her life was announced at Cannes. What was the significance of that for you, Selma, in terms of the response for Palestine at the festival this year?
So for us Palestinians, we welcome every voice that speaks for our humanity, that brings about our suffering, and that highlights what's going on. So this letter is very meaningful, and it's a very important letter that came from people who care about humanity and who care about the future of this whole planet. Because what's happening in Palestine is really a prism of what is wrong all over the world. And if we don't stand up for Palestine and other causes, Palestine is not the only cause on this planet. It's many people are suffering all over the world, but it does really highlight what is wrong in this world. And people who are standing up for Palestine are really standing up for our humanity. So we welcome that with, we embrace it. We're very grateful for these people who are very courageous, frankly, because there's repercussions for standing for Palestine.
Beyond industry reaction, what's the response been like from the festival goers this year? Have you seen a greater interest in the Palestinian pavilion itself?
Our pavilion is a very small tent that is always crowded and very hot. So I think, there's lots of people there. I haven't been here before, so I can't really tell, but I'm very pleased with people walking in and out, asking questions and lingering and hearing our events and enjoying the food we've been bringing to the tent as well. We are in an international pavilion, so we're surrounded by beloved Arab countries. The Iraqi pavilion is next to us, and so is the Egyptian and the Moroccan and the Jordanian pavilions. So it's been a beautiful gathering of people with shared interests and values and a desire to be standing with Palestine and Palestinian filmmakers.
That was Salma Abu Ayash from the Palestine Film Institute talking to Monocle's Hassan Anderson. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Daniela Peled and Kerry Brown. Today's show was produced by Tom Webb and researched by Francesca Jilks. Our sound engineer was Lily Austin. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily returns at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.